The morning sun painted golden streaks across the small kitchen window as Betty Rodriguez wiped down the counter for the third time. At 72, she had developed habits that kept her busy and her mind occupied. The house felt too quiet since her husband Miguel passed away 2 years ago, but she had learned to fill the silence with small routines. Betty's day always started the same way. Coffee first, then a check on her tomato plants in the backyard. She had been growing vegetables for over 30 years, and neighbors often stopped by to chat about gardening tips or to receive a bag of fresh produce. Her hands, weathered but steady, moved expertly among the plants as she checked for pests and watered the soil. "Morning, Mrs. Rodriguez," called out Danny, the 10-year-old from next door, as he waited for his school bus. "Good morning, sweetheart. Tell your mama I have extra cucumbers if she wants them," Betty replied with a warm smile. She had watched Danny grow up, and he reminded her of her own son at that age, always curious and full of energy. The neighborhood knew Betty as the quiet lady who kept the most beautiful garden on the street. She volunteered at St. Mary's Community Center every Tuesday and Thursday, helping serve lunch to anyone who needed a hot meal. The other volunteers loved working with her because she never complained and always brought homemade desserts that disappeared within minutes. What none of them knew was that Betty's son Robert was currently somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, leading a team of the most elite soldiers in the American military. As a Delta Force commander, Robert Chen Rodriguez had earned a reputation that made even seasoned generals take notice. His missions were so classified that Betty couldn't even tell people what branch of the military he served in. The special phone sat in Betty's bedroom drawer, next to her late husband's reading glasses and a small wooden cross. It was a secure device that Robert had given her before his last deployment. They could only talk once a week, and even then, he couldn't tell her much about what he was doing or where exactly he was stationed. Every Sunday at exactly 3 in the afternoon, Pacific time, the phone would buzz. Betty would drop whatever she was doing and hurry to answer it. These 15-minute conversations were the highlight of her week, even though they left her with more questions than answers. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling this week?" Robert's voice always sounded tired, but he tried to keep it light for her sake. "I'm doing well, mijo. The garden is producing so much I can't keep up. Mrs. Patterson from down the street took a whole bag of tomatoes yesterday." Betty would update him on all the neighborhood news, knowing he enjoyed hearing about normal life. "That's great, Mom. Are you taking your medicine? Getting enough sleep?" Robert always asked the same health questions, and Betty could hear the worry in his voice even through the encrypted connection. Yes, don't worry about your old mother. I'm tougher than I look," she would laugh, but inside, her heart ached, knowing her son was in danger somewhere far away. Robert had been this way since he was a child, always protective of his family. After his father died in a construction accident when Robert was 16, he had stepped up to help support the household. Betty had wanted him to go to college, but Robert felt called to serve his country. He enlisted in the Army right after high school and quickly proved himself to be an exceptional soldier. The transformation from her sweet boy to a hardened military commander had been gradual, but Betty noticed the changes during his visits home. Robert moved differently now, always alert, always scanning his surroundings. His eyes had a sharpness that hadn't been there before, and sometimes she caught him checking the locks on doors and windows multiple times. Despite his intense career, Robert never missed sending flowers on Mother's Day or calling on her birthday. He had arranged for a neighborhood teenager, Carlos, to help with any heavy lifting around the house and to check on her regularly. Carlos didn't know about Robert's real job either. He just knew that Mrs. Rodriguez's son was deployed overseas and wanted to make sure his mother was safe. Betty kept Robert's military decorations in a small fireproof safe in her closet. She had never displayed them because Robert had asked her not to, explaining that it was safer for both of them if people didn't know about his specialized training. The medals included commendations for valor, leadership, and several operations that she would never fully understand. On quiet evenings, Betty would sometimes take out the folded American flag that had covered Miguel's casket and hold it while looking at old family photos. Miguel had been so proud when Robert graduated from basic training, and she knew he would be amazed at what their son had accomplished. But she also knew Miguel would worry, just like she did, about the dangerous life Robert had chosen. The community center where Betty volunteered was always buzzing with activity. She worked in the kitchen, preparing meals and chatting with the regular visitors. Many of them were elderly like herself. Some were families going through hard times, and others were veterans who appreciated having a place to gather and share stories. "Betty, you make the best cornbread I've ever tasted," said Tom, a Vietnam veteran who came in every Thursday. "My wife used to make it, but yours might be even better, though don't tell her I said that if you see her up in heaven." Betty laughed and patted Tom's shoulder. "Your secret is safe with me. I'll pack you some extra to take home." These interactions filled Betty's heart with purpose. She had learned after Miguel's death that staying busy and helping others was the best way to deal with loneliness. The people at the community center had become like extended family, and she looked forward to seeing their faces each week. Her small house on Maple Street was exactly the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. Neighbors borrowed cups of sugar, kids played in the streets until their parents called them for dinner, and the biggest drama was usually about whose turn it was to organize the annual block party. Betty had lived there for 35 years and knew everyone's routines almost as well as her own. Every evening after dinner, Betty would sit on her front porch with a cup of tea and watch the world go by. She knew that Mr. Peterson walked his dog at exactly 7:30, that the Williams family had pizza delivered every Friday night, and that the teenage couple from the corner house would sneak out to meet each other around 10 o'clock. These simple observations made her feel connected to the life around her, even when her own house felt too empty. She would wave to people passing by and sometimes invite neighbors to sit and chat if they had time. Most people in the neighborhood saw her as a sweet grandmother figure who posed no threat to anyone and could always be counted on for a kind word or a helping hand. Betty had no idea that in less than 2 weeks, her peaceful life would be shattered by a mistake that would change everything. She had no way of knowing that her son's carefully hidden identity would soon become the most important fact about their family. For now, she was simply a retired woman who loved her garden, her community, and her weekly phone calls with a son whose true capabilities remained a secret that could shake the very foundations of justice. Detective Ray Thompson rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the computer screen for the third time that evening. The numbers on the warrant application seemed to blur together after working 14 hours straight. The department had been under pressure to crack down on drug operations in the area, and his supervisor had made it clear that results were expected quickly. The target was supposed to be Vincent "Vince" Martinez, a suspected dealer who had been moving large quantities of substances through the east side of town. Intelligence suggested he kept a significant stash at his residence on Maple Street. Thompson squinted at the address on his screen, 1247 Maple Street. He typed it into the warrant application, not noticing that his source had actually said 1274 Maple Street. It was an honest mistake, the kind that happens when people are overworked and rushing to meet deadlines. But honest mistakes can have devastating consequences. The warrant was approved by Judge Harrison at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Harrison had been signing paperwork for hours and barely glanced at the address. The justice system was backed up, and everyone was trying to process cases as quickly as possible. Nobody double-checked the house number because everyone assumed someone else had already done it. Meanwhile, Betty Rodriguez was having trouble sleeping. At her age, she often found herself waking up in the middle of the night, sometimes because of aches and pains, sometimes just because her mind wouldn't quiet down. Tonight she was thinking about Robert. Their last phone call had been shorter than usual, and she could tell something was bothering him, though he wouldn't say what. She got up to make herself some warm milk, a remedy her own mother had taught her years ago. As she stood in the kitchen, she looked out the window at the quiet street. Everything looked peaceful. A few porch lights were on, and she could see the soft glow from Mrs. Patterson's television through her living room curtains. Betty had no idea that 3 blocks away, the real Vincent Martinez was counting money from his latest sales, completely unaware that law enforcement was closing in. His house at 1274 Maple Street was actually under surveillance, but the officers watching it didn't know about the warrant mix-up either. The tactical team assembled at 4:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Sergeant Mike Collins briefed his officers in the parking lot of a closed gas station. He had been leading these operations for 8 years and knew how important it was to get everyone on the same page before moving in. Target is Vincent Martinez, suspected dealer. Intelligence says he's got a substantial operation running out of this house. We expect resistance, so stay sharp. Address is 1247 Maple Street, Collins announced to his team of 6 officers. Officer Janet Torres raised her hand. Do we know if there are other people in the house? Family members? Kids? Intel suggests he lives alone, but stay alert for anyone else who might be present. Our priority is securing the scene safely, Collins replied, checking his equipment one more time. The team drove to Maple Street in unmarked vehicles as the sun was just beginning to rise. The neighborhood was still, quiet, with most people either sleeping or just starting their morning routines. A few early commuters were backing out of driveways heading to work. Betty's house at 1247 Maple Street looked exactly like what it was, the home of a retired grandmother. Her small garden was neatly maintained, and children's chalk drawings from the neighborhood kids decorated part of her driveway. A ceramic frog sat among her flower pots, and a small American flag hung from her porch. The officers positioned themselves around the house, following standard procedure. Collins approached the front door while Torres and 2 other officers covered the back exit. The plan was to knock and announce themselves, giving anyone inside a chance to surrender peacefully. But Betty was a sound sleeper when she finally did fall asleep, and she didn't hear the first round of knocking. Collins knocked harder, calling, "Out, police! Search warrant!" But the words didn't register clearly through the door in Betty's bedroom window. When Betty finally woke up, she was confused and disoriented. She could hear voices outside but couldn't make out what they were saying. Looking at her clock, she saw it was 5:45 a.m. Nobody should be at her house this early, unless something was wrong. Her first thought was that something had happened to one of her neighbors. Maybe Mrs. Patterson had fallen, or maybe there had been an accident on the street. Betty put on her robe and slippers and walked toward the front door. The sound of movement inside the house made the officers more alert. Collins signaled to his team that someone was awake and moving around. Standard procedure required them to be ready for anything, including the possibility that someone might try to destroy evidence or pose a threat. Betty approached her front door and tried to look through the peephole, but her eyesight wasn't what it used to be, especially in the dim morning light. She could see shapes of people outside, but she couldn't tell who they were or what they wanted. "Who's there?" Betty called out, her voice shaky with sleep and confusion. "Police! We have a search warrant! Open the door!" Collins shouted back. Betty's heart started racing. Police? At her house? This had to be some kind of mistake. She had never broken any laws in her life. The most trouble she had ever been in was a parking ticket from 1987 that she had forgotten to pay on time. "There must be some mistake," Betty called through the door. "I think you have the wrong house." But in the confusion of the moment, with adrenaline pumping and procedures to follow, the officers interpreted her hesitation as potential resistance. Collins made the decision to enter the house, fearing that evidence might be destroyed or that the situation could escalate. Betty heard the sound of her front door being forced open and panicked. In her frightened state, she reached for the only thing she could think of, her phone. She wanted to call 911, not understanding that the people breaking into her house were actually police officers. The sight of Betty reaching for something triggered the officers' training about potential weapons or communication with accomplices. In the chaos and confusion of those crucial seconds, with poor lighting and high stress, a series of tragic misunderstandings unfolded. What happened next would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Betty Rodriguez, a 72-year-old grandmother who had never hurt anyone, became the victim of a system failure that started with a simple typo and ended with irreversible consequences. The real Vincent Martinez, 3 blocks away at 1274 Maple Street, slept peacefully through the entire incident, completely unaware that his criminal activities had indirectly led to a tragedy that would soon make national headlines and change multiple lives forever. Within minutes, the quiet street where children played and neighbors borrowed sugar from each other became a crime scene. The peaceful life that Betty had built over decades was shattered, and somewhere overseas, Robert Rodriguez would soon receive the worst phone call of his life. The satellite phone crackled to life in the middle of the Afghan night. Robert Rodriguez was cleaning his gear after a successful mission when Captain Williams approached him with a grim expression. In 12 years of military service, Robert had learned to read faces, and he knew immediately that something was very wrong. "Rodriguez, I need you to come with me." "There's been a call from the States," Captain Williams said quietly, glancing around to make sure other soldiers couldn't overhear. Robert's stomach dropped. The only reason he would get an emergency call from home was if something had happened to his mother. She was the only family he had left, and he had spent years worrying about her living alone while he was deployed in dangerous places around the world. They walked to the communications tent in silence. Robert had been through countless life-threatening situations, had led men into battle, and had made split-second decisions that affected national security, but nothing had prepared him for the conversation he was about to have. The voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Morrison from the local police department back home. His tone was professional but uncomfortable, like someone who had been forced to make a call he really didn't want to make. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm calling about your mother, Betty Rodriguez. I'm very sorry to inform you that she passed away yesterday morning during a police operation at her residence." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He had to sit down to keep from falling over. "What do you mean during a police operation? My mother doesn't have anything to do with police operations." "Sir, I understand this is difficult. Your mother was involved in a drug-related incident at her home. She was armed and posed a threat to officers who were executing a valid search warrant. I'm sorry for your loss." Robert's mind went completely blank for several seconds. Then, the training kicked, and the analytical thinking that had kept him alive in combat zones. Something about this story made absolutely no sense. "Officer, I need you to repeat what you just said because I think there's been some kind of mistake." "Your mother was involved in drug trafficking, sir. She resisted arrest and threatened officers with a weapon. The officers involved followed proper procedure." Robert hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time. His mother, Betty Rodriguez, who couldn't even kill a spider without feeling guilty about it. His mother, who volunteered at the community center and gave away vegetables from her garden. His mother, who had never even gotten a speeding ticket in her entire life. Captain Williams put a hand on Robert's shoulder. "I'm sorry, brother. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." "I need to go home right now," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. I'll get you on the next transport out of here. Take all the time you need." The flight back to the United States felt like it lasted forever. Robert sat in the military transport plane, staring out the window and trying to process what he had been told. Every instinct he had developed as a special operations commander was telling him that something was very wrong with the official story. He arrived at the airport and rented a car, driving straight to the neighborhood where he had grown up. As he turned onto Maple Street, he could see the yellow police tape still hanging from his mother's front porch. The sight of it made his chest tighten with grief and anger. Robert parked across the street and just sat in the car for a while, looking at the house where he had eaten thousands of meals, where his mother had bandaged his scraped knees, where she had worried about him every single day since he joined the military. Mrs. Patterson from next door saw him sitting there and walked over slowly. She was crying before she even reached the car window. "Robert? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I can't believe what happened to your sweet mother. Mrs. Patterson, can you tell me what you saw? The police told me she was involved with drugs, but that doesn't sound like the mother I know." Mrs. Patterson looked shocked. "Drugs? Your mother? That's ridiculous. Betty never even drank alcohol. She was the most honest person I ever met." "Then, what happened? Please, I need to know." "It was early in the morning, maybe 6 o'clock. I heard a lot of noise outside, shouting and banging. When I looked out my window, there were police cars everywhere. They broke down Betty's front door and then..." Mrs. Patterson started crying harder. "Then I heard shouting, and then it was quiet. They wouldn't let any of us get close to see what was happening." Robert felt his hands clench into fists. "Did my mother ever have visitors?" Anyone suspicious coming to the house? The only visitors your mother ever had were neighbors and that nice boy Carlos who helped her with yard work, and the delivery man from the grocery store once a week. Robert, your mother lived the quietest life imaginable. She spent most of her time in that garden or at the community center feeding people. Robert thanked Mrs. Patterson and drove to the police station. He wanted to see the official report and talk to the officers involved. But when he arrived and identified himself, he was told that the case was closed and no further information could be released. Sir, I understand you're grieving, but your mother was involved in criminal activity. The officers involved were cleared. Of any wrongdoing, that's all I can tell you, said the desk sergeant. I want to see the warrant. I want to see the evidence. I want to talk to whoever made the decision to raid my mother's house. That information is not available to family members. You'll need to contact an attorney if you want to pursue this further. Robert left the police station feeling more confused and angry than ever. He drove to the community center where his mother had volunteered, hoping to find someone who could help him understand what had really happened. The staff at the community center were devastated by the news. Tom, the Vietnam veteran who had loved his mother's cornbread, was sitting at one of the tables with tears in his eyes. Your mother was an angel, son. An absolute angel. There's not a person in this building who doesn't have a story about how Betty helped them or made them feel better about something. Tom, did my mother ever mention any problems? Anyone bothering her or asking her about anything unusual? The only thing your mother ever talked about was you and how proud she was of her son serving overseas. She never mentioned any troubles. At all. Robert spent the next 3 days talking to everyone who knew his mother. Neighbors, volunteers at the community center, the mail carrier, the grocery store clerks. Everyone told him the same thing. Betty Rodriguez was exactly who Robert knew her to be. A kind, law-abiding woman who spent her time helping others and missing her son. That's when Robert decided to use the skills that had made him one of the most effective special operations commanders in the military. If the official channels wouldn't give him answers, he would find them himself. He started by visiting the house where the real drug dealer lived, 3 blocks away. The address numbers were indeed very similar. He talked to those neighbors too, and learned that Vincent Martinez had been arrested 2 days after his mother died, at his actual address on the same street. Robert began to understand that his mother had died because of a simple mistake, a wrong address on a warrant. But what made him even angrier was the cover-up, the way the police department was trying to protect itself by destroying his mother's reputation. As he sat in his rental car outside his childhood home, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find out exactly what happened to his mother, and he was going to make sure the people responsible faced consequences for their actions. The quiet, grieving son was about to become something much more dangerous. A highly trained operator with a personal mission and nothing left to lose. Robert spent the first week back home doing what he did best, gathering intelligence. His Delta Force training had taught him how to collect information, analyze patterns, and build a complete picture from scattered pieces of evidence. But this wasn't a foreign battlefield. This was his hometown, and the target was the truth about his mother's death. He rented a small apartment across town and set up what looked like a command center. Maps, photographs, timelines, and documents covered every wall. Robert had learned patience during his military career, and he knew that rushing would only hurt his chances of finding justice for his mother. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carlos, the teenager who had been helping Betty with yard work, approached Robert outside the community center. The young man looked nervous but determined. Mr. Rodriguez, I need to tell you something about the morning your mom died, Carlos said, glancing around to make sure nobody was listening. What is it, Carlos? I couldn't sleep that night, so I was up early playing video games. I heard all the noise outside and looked out my window. I saw everything that happened, and I recorded some of it on my phone. Robert's heart started pounding. You have video footage? Yeah, but I'm scared to show it to anyone. My dad says we shouldn't get involved with police business, especially since we're not citizens yet. But your mom was always nice to my family, and what they're saying about her isn't true. Carlos showed Robert the video on his phone. The footage was shaky and taken from a distance, but it clearly showed police officers surrounding Betty's house. More importantly, it showed the timestamp, 5:47 a.m., and it captured audio of the officers shouting commands. "Carlos, this is incredibly important. Can you send this to me? And are you willing to tell people what you saw?" "I'm scared, Mr. Rodriguez. What if they come after my family?" Robert put his hand on the teenager's shoulder. "I promise you, I will protect you and your family. But this video might be the key to finding out what really happened to my mother. Carlos's video as evidence, Robert began reaching out to other people in the neighborhood, asking if anyone else had seen or recorded anything that morning. He discovered that Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down had a security camera that faced the street, and Mr. Peterson had a doorbell camera that might have captured something. Getting access to these recordings required patience and trust building. Robert had to convince people that he wasn't trying to cause trouble. He just wanted the truth about what happened to his mother. His military bearing and obvious grief helped people understand that he was a son seeking justice, not someone looking for revenge. The doorbell camera footage showed something crucial: the timestamp when police arrived at Betty's house and more. Importantly, it showed them clearly reading the house number before approaching. This proved that they knew exactly which house they were raiding. But Robert's biggest breakthrough came when he decided to visit the courthouse and request copies of all public records related to his mother's case. As someone with security clearance and knowledge of how government systems worked, Robert knew how to navigate bureaucracy better than most people. The clerk at the courthouse, a middle-aged woman named Linda, was initially hesitant to help. But when Robert explained that he was trying to get information about his mother's death, her attitude changed completely. "Honey, I remember reading about that case in the newspaper. I thought it was strange at the time," Linda said quietly. "Let me see what I can find for you." What Linda found changed everything. The original warrant application contained a typo. The address was listed as 1247 Maple Street instead of 1274 Maple Street. But more shocking was what happened after the mistake was discovered. "Look at this," Linda said, pointing to a series of documents. "These are amendment requests filed after the incident. Someone tried to change the original warrant to make it look like they had the right address all along." Robert stared at the papers in disbelief. "Are you saying they tried to cover up the mistake?" "It looks that way to me. And see this signature here? That's Detective Thompson. He's the one who tried to modify the original warrant 3 days after your mother died." Armed with this evidence, Robert knew he needed help from someone who understood the legal system. He contacted attorney Julia Martinez, a civil rights lawyer who had a reputation for taking on cases against police departments. When Robert walked into her office with boxes of evidence, Julia was initially skeptical. She had seen many families who believed their loved ones had been wronged by police, but most of the time, the official story was accurate, even if it was tragic. But as Robert laid out the evidence, the video footage, the witness statements, the original warrant documents, and the attempted cover-up, Julia's expression changed from polite interest to genuine shock. "Mr. Rodriguez, if this evidence is authentic, this represents a massive failure of the justice system, followed by an attempt to hide that failure," Julia said. "This isn't just about your mother's death. This is about corruption and cover-up at the highest levels of the police department." "What can we do about it?" Robert asked. "We're going to need more than just civil action. This needs criminal investigation. I have contacts at the FBI who handle cases involving police corruption. Are you prepared for this to become very public, very quickly?" Robert thought about his mother's reputation, about the neighbors who still believed she had been involved with drugs, about the community center volunteers who were confused and hurt by the official story. "My mother's name needs to be cleared. The truth needs to come out, no matter what it costs." Julia made the calls, and within a week, FBI agent Patricia Davis was sitting in Robert's makeshift command center, reviewing all the evidence he had collected. Agent Davis had been investigating police corruption for 15 years, and she knew a solid case when she saw one. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is excellent investigative work. You've essentially built our entire case for us," Agent Davis said. "But I need to warn you, once we start this process, there's no going back. The police department will fight hard to protect themselves, and they might try to discredit you or your mother. Agent Davis, my mother was the most honest person I've ever known. I've spent my career serving this country, and I believe in justice. If we don't hold people accountable when they make mistakes and then try to cover them up, then what's the point of having laws at all? The FBI investigation moved quickly once it began. Agent Davis obtained warrants for the police department's records, interviewed all the officers involved, and brought in experts to analyze the evidence Robert had collected. Detective Thompson initially denied any wrongdoing, insisting that the warrant had been correct and that Betty Rodriguez had posed a legitimate threat. But when confronted with the courthouse documents showing his attempted modifications to the warrant, and with video evidence contradicting his report, Thompson's story began to fall apart. Sergeant Collins, who had led the raid, broke down during his interview with the FBI. He admitted that the team had realized they were at the wrong house within minutes of the incident, but that they had been ordered to stick to the official story to protect the department. "We knew she was just a scared old lady," Collins told Agent Davis through tears, but Thompson told us that if the truth came out, it would destroy all our careers and cost the city millions in lawsuits. He said we had to stick together. As the investigation expanded, more evidence of corruption emerged. The FBI discovered that Detective Thompson had been involved in several other questionable cases, and that Police Chief Anderson had been aware of problems in the department, but had chosen to cover them up rather than address them. Robert watched the investigation unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was finally coming for his mother, but it couldn't bring her back. Every night he still reached for his phone at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoons, expecting to hear her voice asking about his health and telling him about her garden. The case was about to become national news, and Robert knew that his quiet life as an anonymous special operations soldier was about to end forever. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and law enforcement officials when Detective Thompson's trial began 6 months after the FBI investigation concluded. Robert sat in the front row, wearing his dress uniform, watching as the man who had tried to cover up his mother's death faced justice. The evidence was overwhelming. Carlos testified about what he had witnessed, his voice shaking but determined as he described the events of that morning. Mrs. Patterson cried as she told the jury about Betty's character and how impossible it was that she could have been involved with drugs. The courthouse clerk, Linda, explained how Thompson had tried to alter the warrant documents after the fact, but the most powerful moment came when Sergeant Collins took the stand and admitted his role in the cover-up. The veteran officer, who had served the community for 15 years, broke down as he described the pressure he felt to lie about what had happened. "We all knew we had made a terrible mistake," Collins said, his voice barely audible. "Mrs. Rodriguez was an innocent woman who died because we went to the wrong house. But Detective Thompson convinced us that telling the truth would destroy our careers and hurt the department. I've regretted going along with that lie every single day since." Thompson was convicted on multiple charges, including filing false reports, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Sergeant Collins received a lighter sentence of 2 years in exchange for his cooperation, but his career in law enforcement was over. Police Chief Anderson resigned in disgrace when Internal Affairs discovered he had known about the cover-up, but had chosen to protect his department's reputation instead of seeking justice for Betty. The mayor appointed a new chief with a mandate to reform the entire department. But for Robert, the criminal, convictions were only the beginning. Working with Attorney Martinez, he filed a civil lawsuit against the city, seeking not just monetary compensation, but systematic changes to prevent future tragedies. The civil trial brought even more attention to the case. Robert found himself testifying before city council meetings, speaking at community forums, and being interviewed by news outlets across the country. He had never wanted to be in the public eye, but he realized that his military background gave his words weight that other victims' families might not have. "This isn't just about my mother," Robert told a packed city council meeting. "This is about making sure that no other family has to go through what we've been through. It's about making sure that when police make mistakes, they're held accountable." instead of being covered up. The city ultimately settled the lawsuit for $2.8 million, but more importantly, they agreed to implement a series of reforms that Robert and Attorney Martinez had proposed. Every warrant would now require double verification of addresses. Body cameras would be mandatory for all officers participating in raids, and any incident resulting in civilian death would be automatically investigated by an independent agency. With the legal battles concluded, Robert faced a choice about his future. The military had granted him extended leave, but eventually he would need to decide whether to return to active duty or start a new chapter in his life. The decision became clear during a visit to his mother's grave. He had been coming there every Sunday at 3 p.m., the time when they used to have their weekly phone calls. As he sat beside her headstone, he realized what his mother would want him to do with the settlement money and the platform he had gained. Robert used part of the settlement to establish the Betty Rodriguez Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to police accountability and community relations. The foundation provided legal assistance to families who believed their loved ones had been wronged by law enforcement, funded community programs that brought police and residents together, and lobbied for legislative changes at the state level. The Foundation's first project was renovating the community center where Betty had volunteered. Robert turned it into a hub for police community dialogue, offering meeting spaces where residents could discuss concerns with law enforcement in a neutral setting. The walls were decorated with photos from the neighborhood, including several pictures of Betty working in her garden and serving meals to visitors. Tom, the Vietnam veteran who had loved Betty's cornbread, became one of the foundation's first volunteer coordinators. "Your mother would be so proud of what you're doing," he told Robert during the grand reopening ceremony. "She always believed that people could solve their problems by talking to each other with respect." Robert also used his military contacts to develop training programs for police departments across the country. Drawing on his experience in high-stress combat situations, he helped create protocols for de-escalation and decision-making under pressure. The programs emphasized the importance of double-checking information and communicating clearly during operations. The work wasn't easy. Many police departments were resistant to outside criticism, and some community members were skeptical of any program that involved law enforcement. But Robert's unique background, as both a grieving family member and a respected military leader, allowed him to bridge gaps that others couldn't. 3 years after his mother's death, Robert received a call that would have made Betty incredibly proud. The FBI asked him to testify before Congress about police reform and accountability. Sitting in the same chambers where laws were made, Robert spoke about his mother's life and death to a room full of senators and representatives. "My mother, Betty Rodriguez, never wanted to be famous. She never wanted to change the world. She just wanted to grow her vegetables, help her neighbors, and talk to her son once a week," Robert told the assembled lawmakers. "But her death has taught us that ordinary people deserve extraordinary protection from the institutions that serve them. We can honor her memory by making sure that truth and justice matter more than protecting reputations." The testimony led to the passage of the Betty Rodriguez Act, federal legislation requiring independent investigation of all police-involved civilian deaths and mandating body cameras for federally funded law enforcement agencies. Robert, eventually, decided to retire from active military duty, though he remained in the reserves. He bought a small house just 2 blocks from where his mother had lived, close enough that he could walk to her grave and tend the flowers he had planted there. Every Sunday at 3 p.m. he still visited her headstone. But now, instead of the painful silence he had felt in the months after her death, he found himself telling her about the foundation's work, about the families they had helped, and about the changes they were making in communities across the country. "We did it, Mom," he said during one of these visits, kneeling to water the tomato plants he had grown from seeds taken from her garden. "We made sure that what happened to you will help other people. I think you would like the community center now. People from all over the neighborhood come there to talk and help each other just like you always did." The neighborhood had changed too. Mrs. Patterson still lived next door to Betty's old house, and she had become one of the foundation's strongest supporters. Carlos had graduated high school and was studying criminal justice in college, inspired by Robert's example, to pursue a career in law enforcement reform. The house at 1247 Maple Street had been sold to a young family with 2 small children. Robert often saw them playing in the yard where his mother had grown her vegetables, and he was glad that the place held joy again instead of just tragedy. As he walked home from the cemetery that Sunday, Robert's phone buzzed with a text message from Attorney Martinez. Another family in a different state needed their help with a police accountability case. The work continued, and Robert knew it always would. But he also knew that every family they helped, every reform they achieved, and every life they touched was a way of keeping his mother's memory alive. Betty Rodriguez had died because of a simple mistake that became a complex cover-up. But her death had sparked changes that would protect countless other families from experiencing the same tragedy. In the end, the quiet grandmother, who just wanted to help her neighbors, had helped an entire nation examine how justice should work for everyone.